There we are. Okay, so let's get going. So we're working through the Unit 1 respiratory system. So what we'll do is we'll sort of break en route to go through a couple of sections of your workbook and give you the opportunity to write straight into your manual. So the idea is that we'll sort of chunk this as we go along, and then you're going to send your completed manual to me. So it is really important that you keep up to speed with it. It's also really important that you fill it out in a way that reflects that it's a piece of assessed work that will form part of your final assessment. So we'll make sure that when we get to that section, you do give it appropriate time. Okay, so let's get going. So what our aims are is to introduce the structure and function of the respiratory system. So some of you may have done lots of this stuff before. Some of you, it may be a while since you have. So we kind of want to have a good grasp of the basics of the respiratory system. So we really, from a kind of a couple of angles, really. For me, it's really important to know these systems so we know what changes when we get fitter. So it gives us a good sort of grasp of maybe why we need to get people working at different intensities of fitness, using different types of training, and also for different times, so different duration of training, so that we can really sort of stimulate the right changes we want in people's respiratory systems. The other thing I think is really important is that we get an understanding of where people are limited with their respiratory system. So it's quite common to get people coming into gyms who have got things like asthma, and it's useful to know where that affects. It's common to get people who have things like chronic bronchitis or emphysema, and it's useful to know the difference between those. So we know that, so we kind of begin to understand people's limitations with respect to their ability to exercise. So it's important for us to develop this knowledge, to improve our programming, but also to improve the understanding of our clients. So by the end of the session, I think we've probably got enough time to do it in one hit, actually. Well, we'll do a fair chunk of it today. So I think a little bit will come over, will sort of flow over into tomorrow's session. So we will be able to identify the location of the lungs. So I'm going to get you to do a little task for me on that. You will describe the function of the lungs. So again, you'll do a little bit of writing on that for me. And we're importantly going to understand the structure of the lungs. So that's going to be a really important thing for you to put together, and we'll sort of chunk our way there, so you have quite a nice sort of grasp of what to say. So as well as that, this is a bit more in tomorrow, but we'll sort of touch on it a bit today. We'll identify the main muscles involved in breathing. You should really, by the end of the session, be able to get this, describe the passage of air through the respiratory tract. And you should be able to, I think, describe the process of gaseous exchange and kind of give me a good understanding of that. So quite a lot of bits to get through. To begin with, I'm going to get your chat box knowledge. So I want you to have a look at these questions. And I'm going to get us to answer them in pairs, okay? So we're going to do them in twos. So I want you all to look at questions 1 and 2. And what I want you to do is I want you to pop your answer into chat box, okay? What contains hairs to help filter air entering the respiratory system? And what structure contains C-shaped rings of cartilage and connects the pharynx up here to the bronchi down here? So if you know the answers, pop them into your chat box. You should all be able to figure out number 1. So I should expect to see everyone give me some form of answer. Okay? So 1 and 2, give me your best answers. That's good. Someone's got the first one. Well done. Keep them coming in. That's good. Ash, Caden, Adil, well done. A couple more people haven't responded yet. Try and get number 2. What do we know about number 2? Can anyone get that? Anyone? Okay, have a little think. What structures do you know right now? Close, Troy, not quite right. Whoever iPhone is, Adil, not quite. That's more of a digestive system part, actually, but good knowledge. Close. Okay, well, this is number one contains hairs to help filter air entering the respiratory system, is our nose. So our nose has got some external hairs to sort of trap big particles contained within the air. And then as it goes back, we have a system that warms, it moistens, and then it continues the filtering of air. We have these tiny little projection, hair-like projections that help filter out substances coming in. Air enters our nose, goes back past our pharynx, past our voice box, and then into the trachea. So the trachea contains these C-shaped rings of cartilage, and we'll look at that in a sec. It then branches out. Now, you've got 2 more questions here. So number 3 and number 4. So when you get bronchitis, what structure gets inflamed? So anywhere where you have an itis shows there's inflammation. So imagine I have tonsillitis, I have inflammation of my tonsils. So what gets inflamed when I have bronchitis? It's part of the respiratory system. I also want you to tell me what the tiny sacs where gas exchange takes place. Can you remember those from any previous studies? So have a go at those 2. Let's see if I can get some more names on my chat box. Okay, so I've got a few people, they're the same, a few regulars. So let's see if we can get some more people in there. So number 3, what structure gets inflamed when you have bronchitis? Yeah, you're right. Adil, that's right. Well done, Luke. Good stuff. Well done, Troy. Luke, yeah, good stuff. Get in there, Luke. Yeah, well done. No, I think you're right first time, actually, Luke. I think that's the best one. The first one was the right one. Any more coming in? Okay, so good start. Well done. Okay, so the structure that gets inflamed when you have bronchitis are the bronchi or bronchus. So this is your trachea, comes down here and then branches out to your bronchi. We'll look at the structure of those in a minute. So some people have got a good sort of background in this, others less so, but we can get there pretty quick. The tiny sacs where gas exchange takes place are the alveoli. You have tiny little sacs where air is able to, or gas is able to cross over from inside the lungs into the bloodstream. Number 5 and 6, the muscle is dome-shaped and located under the lungs that helps you breathe in, and the flat bone at the front of the chest, which will protect them. So let's just get those 2 into chat box, please. Let's see if we can get some other names in there. Luke, think of the bone that helps protect, and it's the muscle underneath the lung. So we'll look at the location of that muscle in a minute. Oh, not quite. Okay, we've got a bit of, okay, we might need to look at these muscles of respiration in a minute. The bone at the front, what's the one that protects the heart and the lungs at the front? What's that bone? We'll need to know this to describe the location of the lungs in a minute. The collarbone, yeah, these are the clavicles. So think about the flat bone. So the flat bone underneath, this one here, begins with an S. Anyone? Can someone give that to me? Flat bone begins with an S, begins with an ST, begins with an STU. Oh, sorry, yeah, STE, sorry. Sternum, well done, sternum. Good stuff. So the muscle that's dome-shaped underneath is called the diaphragm, and we'll look at the location of that in a little while. We'll do a bit more on the mechanics of breathing tomorrow, but we'll just kind of look at where that muscle sits. The bone that's flat and protects the lungs at the front of the chest is just our sternum, which is great. And then the last two questions, gas transfers from lungs, so the question is which gas transfers from the lungs into the blood, and which gas transfers from the deoxygenated blood back into the lungs to be exhaled. So have a little think about what comes in and what goes out. Good, Caden, oxygen comes in. Well done. What goes out? What goes the other way? Yeah, good. Carbon dioxide. Yeah, and you also put nitrogen, which is good. Yeah, so that doesn't really come in. So it sort of just stays in the air that we breathe in, and then so we don't get much transfer of nitrogen. So you're absolutely right. Actually, the air that we exhale is I think it's about 16% oxygen, quite a lot of carbon dioxide, but also a little bit of nitrogen sort of sticks in. So it's sort of, you're right. Some people exhale methane, maybe. Yeah, maybe they do, Caden. Yeah, no. Generally, we should see carbon dioxide as the main gas that comes from blood out into our lungs. So that's what we're really interested in. We're interested in what gas is able to be drawn into the lungs, but importantly transferred into that bloodstream. And then importantly, what gas was inside our bloodstream finds its way back. So it's the carbon dioxide that has been in our blood vessels finds its way into our lungs, and an oxygen comes into the lungs and transfers into our blood. So there's some good stuff here. I think there's some people should get this quick. Some people we can work on it and get them up to speed. So this is a really nice picture, just of the overview of the system. So there's some bits we don't need to go into massively, but it's useful to just emphasize. So I asked you to emphasize nose hair, which is here. So when we talk about the filtering system of the nose, the hairs at the front just sort of trap the big stuff. What you can see is just behind that, we've got these kind of shelves, which means that air, I'm just sort of drawing in there in purple, kind of goes up and through those shelves. So where I'm drawing in purple on your screen is really the kind of three routes that air goes into once it hits the back of your nasal cavity. And this sort of does a few things. It allows it to get warm. So if you've ever had a nosebleed, you'll see how much blood is in your, is in capillaries in your nose. So it means that the whole area is very warm. So our air is easier to kind of get into our system if it's nice and warm. It also stops irritation if it's slightly moist. So air which passes over those capillaries also passes over these tiny little mucus cells, which makes it slightly moist, and it also helps filter that air as it comes in. So it's good to breathe through your nose because it gives that filtration, whereas if you sort of just sit there with your mouth open, you don't get that filtration effect. So that first bit, we don't really need to go into the structure of that nasal cavity to any great extent, but it's useful to just sort of see that this isn't just it. A lot of the work of our nose is done behind in our skull, really. So we saw that air passes over the back, and the back of our mouth is our throat, which is our pharynx. So if you've ever had pharyngitis, that's just a really nasty sore throat, and then it kind of goes past our larynx, which is our voice box, and then descends down our trachea. So I'm just drawing in the trachea here. I'll colour it actually in a bit more work here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these sections and sort of just emphasize the key points. And then what you're going to do is you're going to fill in a little bit of your workbook to start putting it into action. So those people that really struggled with knowing what that muscle was, that big dome-shaped muscle, look where I'm just drawing here. This here is your diaphragm. So this is a big dome-shaped muscle like this, sort of attaches onto the base of your spine and then underneath the lungs. When it contracts, it moves down about that much, tiny amount, as your stomach goes forward. As it does that, it draws air into the lungs. So our diaphragm, the primary muscle of breathing, is right underneath those lungs. So it just drops down and it sort of pulls the lungs, a bit like a bicycle pump. So when you sort of pull a bicycle pump, it draws air into that pump. So the diaphragm does the same kind of thing, always just moves about that much, just descends and back, descends, drawing air into that system. So our primary muscle of inspiration is the diaphragm. We also have muscles up here which raise the chest. So when you're a bit more stressed or working a bit harder, your chest begins to elevate. Again, that draws air into that system, but we'll look at that another day. So let's press on. Just clear this off. Okay, so as we move on to the location, what we're going to do in a minute is we're going to describe the location of the lungs. So I've got a really sort of nice picture on the bottom here, and I want you to look at that picture, and I want to see if you can answer those 5 questions. So this is quite a nice picture because it shows you kind of the structures around those lungs. So I want you to see if you can think of a word that describes the region of the body where the lungs are located. I want you to think about what I've just said and tell me what muscle sits below those lungs. And I want you to think about our lessons from last week and think about what sits between them. Look at the bones and tell me what bones are roughly level with the top of the lungs, but also what can you see that might protect those lungs. So what I'd like you to do, I want everyone to have a go at typing those 5 things into that chat box. So let's see if we can get some different names in there. So I can see some similar recurring names. So let's see if we can get some new ones in there, particularly the new people that have just joined today. So let's see what we can think of. So you should be able to get a few just by looking at that picture. So think about how you describe the region that they're in. Tell me what muscle sits below them, what sits between them, what structure sits between the lungs, what bones are level with the top of the lungs, and what bones protect them. Okay, let's go. Good. So yeah, a couple of bits, chest, yeah. Okay, maybe think about some good examples. So some people are saying the chest. What else can we say? What about a word begins with a T, a TH? That's good, Paige. Yeah, so Paige has mentioned that it's the thorax the region of the body. So we can describe the lungs are located in the thorax in the body. So someone said also said chest, which is fine. So we can say the lungs are located in the chest or thorax region of the body. The muscle below is the diaphragm. I think Adil has already come back with, so it's great. So the lungs are located in the thorax or chest region of the body. The diaphragm sits directly below them. Good. Come on, let someone tell me what sits between them. What sits between them? Good, Caden. You've mentioned the diaphragm as being the muscle that sits below them. Well done. So what structure sits between those two lungs? So we saw it directly located in the middle. Pumps blood around the body. Come on, you got this. Good, well done, Ash. So the heart sits between them. So you can say the lungs sit either side of the heart, or they're separated by the heart. Well done, Paige. Good, well done, Kai. So the rib cage protects the lungs as well. Well done. So far we've got four. Well, we've got most things here. Can someone give me the bone that's roughly level with the top of the lungs? So what do you feel here? So this is just about roughly level with the top of the lungs. What are these ones? Someone said it in the previous chat box, actually. Yeah, so Kai, you've put collarbone. You can also call them the clavicles. So clavicles or collarbone. This is good. So far we know that the lungs are located in the chest or thorax. We know that the diaphragm sits directly below them. We know that the heart sits between them. We know that the clavicles or collarbones are level with the top of the lungs or the apex of the lungs. And we know that at the front, the sternum protects the lungs, but also the ribs at the front, the side, and to a little extent the back as well. So the rib cage sort of surround the lungs to provide that protection. So you're going to do something for me now. You're going to fill in a little bit of your workbook, but we've kind of got most of the information that we need. So you shouldn't really need to look at your instructing manual, because what you're going to tell me is what region of the body the lungs are in. So you're going to tell me that the lungs are located in the thorax. They sit slightly toward the front of the body in the chest, which is kind of fine. You're going to tell me that either directly below the lungs is the diaphragm, or the lungs sit directly above the diaphragm. You're going to tell me that the heart sits between them, or that the lungs sit either side of the heart. You're going to tell me the top of the lungs are roughly level with the clavicles or the collarbones. You're going to tell me that they're protected at the front by this sternum. And you're going to tell me the rest of it at the side, the back, and at the front, maybe all around, is protected by the ribs. So if you tell me those 5 things in your explanation, you're going to give me a really nice sort of coverage of where the lungs sit in the body. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to complete that for me now. So in your workbook, it's on page page 8. So page 8 asks you to describe the location of the lungs. What I'm going to do, I'm going to pause the recording for a second, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to complete that. I need to make sure that you've completed each of those things. You're telling me the region, the muscle below them, what's between them, what's at the top, and what protects at the front and at the side. Okay, so that's your job now. The time by my clock is exactly past. I'm going to set an alarm for 5 minutes time, and you're going to complete that. Okay, right, get to it. So what you should have, again, it's quite a bit of a quick task. So if you need to revisit this later on, then I definitely recommend doing it today when we finish. So you're describing the region of the body. We're describing their location, the fact that the heart sits between, that they're level with the clavicles, and also they're protected at the front by the sternum, and then the sides by the ribs. So I think that's quite a nice way of describing it. Otherwise, you end up with, you know, like almost like a one-word answer. So they describe it in the chest, and I think it's useful to describe anatomical structures in relation to what's nearby. So let's move on. So here is our respiratory system. So we need to have a look at each of those structures and be able to say something useful about them, so we can describe the structure of the lungs. So we've I very briefly touched on the nasal cavity. We need to be able to say something about everything on this picture. So let's get into that now. And we start with the nose. So again, this picture just very quickly just covers those three sort of shelves at the back of the nose. So the nose is kind of cut down the middle by what's called a septum. And then on each side, we have those three layers. So you can see these things called conchae. So those are the layers. So here we've got kind of layer 1 up here. Just give it a different color. So we've got our sort of layer 1 up there, got layer 2 there, and then layer 3 there. So there are three layers, and that allows air to pass close to capillaries. So it warms, it's able to be moistened because we've got these little kind of mucus cells in there, and it slightly filters that air as well. So again, any particles that enter, the big ones are filtered by our nasal hair, and then the rest of it is filtered by these structures inside our nose. When things get trapped, we have these little projections that kind of tickle it backwards. So any sort of gunk that gets stuck in our nose sort of ends up for us being able to swallow into our digestive system. So we'll look at our the route that air takes from there. The next thing it's going to encounter is right at the back of our throat, the pharynx. So we'll look at that now. Don't need to know it in any great depth. So we'll work our way down. So the pharynx is a straight muscular tube connecting the nose and throat. And you can see just the regions on here. So the bit at the back of our nose connecting our throat is called the nasopharynx. So sometimes you get a feeling like when your sore throat almost kind of feels quite high up at the back of your throat. It's really infecting this area here. Where we get that real kind of gravelly sore throat, the one that changes the way that you speak, it affects this area called the oropharynx or the laryngopharynx. But we look at that whole region as being called the pharynx, so the back of our throat. So the pharynx is a straight muscular tube connecting the nose and throat. That's as much as we need to know about it. It's a big tube. It sometimes hurts when we get a sore throat. Otherwise, it stays pretty open. Done. This is an interesting structure. This is our trachea. If you feel, so on at the top of your sternum, you can feel a little kind of V-shaped notch. If you just feel into there, it's sometimes a little bit tender. Just feel into there. I hope you're doing this too. Sometimes you can just make out these little rings of cartilage. So what you feel is little areas here. So what you can see at the top, if you sort of go to the back of the sort of angle of your jaw and just squeeze in a little bit here, you can just move from side to side. And if you could just go, you can feel this cartilage. So the cartilage there protects your thyroid gland. Also back in there is your voice box. So if you sort of go, you can feel that sort of vibration inside your voice box. So we've got this big chunk of thyroid cartilage, and then underneath you can start to feel these little rings of cartilage. So these little rings of cartilage, I'm just drawing one in blue on my screen there. And they're sort of bits of cartilage. And then inside there's a sort of layer of very smooth muscle. So the cartilage is there to make sure that it doesn't get crushed, really. It means that if you try and strangle yourself, that there's a bit of resistance to it. The cartilage is C-shaped. At the back of these little horseshoe-shaped bit of cartilage sits the esophagus. So this is where your food passes down. So the trachea sits just in front of your esophagus. So as you swallow food, a little flap from the esophagus just flips over the trachea and stops you breathing in your food. So the C-shaped rings of cartilage is about 12 centimeters long, about like that. And those C-shapes give it a little bit of flexibility, but also stop it from being kind of crushed. So the hyaline cartilage is quite hard, and then inside is lined with kind of smooth muscle, and then also a nice sort of moist tissue that keeps the air nice and sort of moistened. What you can see as that trachea descends, it branches out into two structures. Now, a couple of you mentioned it on the chat box. These are our bronchi. So we're going to look at the bronchi very quickly. So at the top, we had our cartilage, our thyroid cartilage, which you can move around. And underneath, we felt those rings of cartilage. At the bottom, it branches out into the bronchi. So here, you can see those two bronchi. So you can see, if you look at that picture, you can see a slight difference between the left and the right bronchi. So you can see the trachea as it comes down, and then the left and the right are ever so slightly different. Why might they be slightly different in shape? They're not perfectly symmetrical, are they? Why are they slightly different? Can someone give me in the chat box why we might have a slightly different shape for our left and right bronchi? Anyone? Anyone think about what structures inside that chest? Yeah, good, Shihanna. Well done, Shihanna. Yeah, and well done, Caden. Good. So you said that the heart is in the middle, but also slightly located to that left side. So if you look on that picture, the left bronchi actually is a little bit longer, has a stretch out slightly to the side, whereas the right side just goes straight down, or almost straight down. Very subtle, but a slight difference. The bronchi are rings of cartilage. So what that means is that nothing crushes them. So the trachea is C-shaped cartilage, sort of located deep in that chest, and then they branch out either side into these rings of cartilage. And you can see that on that picture, those little rings of cartilage. Now, that means that they stay, they should stay open pretty much all the time. If anyone's ever had bronchitis, bronchitis is an inflammation inside those rings of cartilage. So inside the bronchi, you've got a layer of kind of very smooth muscle. And if we get irritated, so smokers tend to get chronic bronchitis. So people who smoke a lot and for a long period of time, the inside of the lungs become inflamed. They start to secrete an awful lot of mucus, and it becomes harder to breathe, harder to get air through those tubes because they're so inflamed and space is limited. So when people get bronchitis, it's just literally an inflammation inside these bronchi that I'm outlining there. Now, if you look at the next section, I've put they divide further. So what you can see is, can you see how they sort of just go further into slightly different structures. So you can see, I'm just going to put it into slightly different color. Hang on, just right into page. So what you can see, I'm just going to pop it onto a different color. So I put it into blue. Can you see as I follow that bronchi, can you see the very defined ring structure around that area? But now, as we move into smaller structures, it becomes slightly smoother. Can you see? So as these move out, I'm not drawing it particularly well, but what you can see is if you follow that bronchi into these things called bronchioles, that the structure changes. Now, where it was rings of cartilage, it's now mostly smooth muscle. So has anyone got asthma in the group? Have we got any asthmatics? Have we got any asthmatics? Any coming in? Surely there must be at least one in this size group. Okay, yeah, we've got someone coming in on private. So when people have asthma, it's those bronchioles that start to get constricted. So when your lungs are irritated, so some people, things like exercising in cold weather can spark asthma. Some people it's things like dust. Other people it's particular chemicals or fumes. Other people it just seems to come out of nowhere. But what happens is those little bronchioles get constricted. So there's smooth muscle, so it kind of goes into a constriction, and it limits the ability to get air into the lungs and finally get air as far as those alveoli at the end. So we'll move on. I've got a couple of nice pictures on this next slide, which I think will help. So let me just clear that off. So this is a nice picture. And can you see how that trachea, what we can see is as the trachea descends, so I'm just sort of drawing it alongside it there. Can you see those really defined rings of cartilage, C-shaped, horseshoe-shaped rings of cartilage? It goes past the bronchi, and look, they're slightly different shaped, left and right, and they're complete rings of cartilage. But as we move to these areas here, the cartilage, which is that sort of stuffing grey, becomes much less. So it's much more kind of smooth muscle. So as the structure gets progressively smaller, the amount of cartilage gets slightly less. So the nice picture I've got, so what I've done on this next slide is I've kind of tried to show you, while people sometimes talk about the bronchial tree, because if you flip over that picture like so, it kind of looks like a tree, doesn't it? So you can see the trachea as the trunk, you can see the bronchi as the branches, and you can see the bronchioles as the twigs. And that's quite an interesting way of looking at the respiratory tract, looking at it as a tree, because it kind of almost does the opposite of a tree in a way. So trees take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and create oxygen, and we take in oxygen from the atmosphere and breathe out carbon dioxide. So it's quite an interesting way to look at that structure. Yes, Luke, it's meant to be upside down. There we are, it's upside down. So I've just flipped the picture over. So if you look at the structure of the bronchi, so here, trachea coming in, bronchi branching out, bronchioles, just flip it over, it kind of looks like a what we call the bronchial tree. So you can see the trachea, the trunk, the bronchi, the branches, the bronchioles, or the twigs. Okay. So finally, Do I think the yeah? So yeah, someone's so Caden's asked, do we think that the sort of the word bronchi comes from branch? It quite might well do actually. It's probably some sort of Latin root. It might be an interesting thing to look up after actually. It certainly sounds like it should be. You would imagine if something called a trunk, it might be sorry, trachea. It sounds like it might be related to the word trunk, and bronchi could be related to the word branch. So I think there's definitely possibility there. So lastly, we've got the alveoli, and I've kept that previous picture just at the bottom, just to show you that right at the end of those twigs, whereas in a tree you'd have twigs, here we've got our bronchioles, but in a tree at the end of the twig you'll have leaves, and we've got alveoli. So alveoli are tiny little sacs of air. So effectively this is where gas exchange happens. So when we get to the end of those bronchioles, they'll lead into little groups of these sacs of alveoli. Now these are so thin, so minute, that if you squash them all out and laid them out, they cover the size of, I think it's 2 tennis courts. So their surface area is absolutely giant. So it shows you how sort of thin and fragile lung tissue is. So when smokers, when long-term smokers, they really risk damaging these tiny alveoli at the end of the lungs. Now, so they're tiny air sacs. We have about 250 million in each lung. They're very thin. Now that picture at the top, what I've tried to get across here is the fact that if we imagine, so let's take a nice orangey color, that if we've got oxygen in high concentration in the air that we've breathed in, what it will do, it will actually transfer across into the red blood cells. So what you actually see is a transferring of oxygen, like so. So oxygen moves into the red blood cells because it's in a high concentration in those alveoli. So the air that we breathe in, high concentration of oxygen, and it moves by a process of diffusion. So where it's this large amounts of oxygen diffuses into that bloodstream. Now, what gas is coming back in high concentration in the blood? What gas is coming back in high concentration in the blood? Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, carbon dioxide. So this is coming the opposite direction. So there, we've got there. Okay, so carbon dioxide moves back into these alveoli. So they're thin-walled to allow that gas exchange. So surrounding, what you can see in that bottom picture, what I want you to look at there is the fact that every alveoli is surrounded by loads of capillaries. There's some bringing deoxygenated blood in, it becomes oxygenated, and then goes back into those veins. So remember that whole structure we looked at the other day about how the pulmonary circulation oxygenates our blood. So here you can see that happening. That blue blood vessel brings deoxygenated blood to the alveoli. The alveoli pass oxygen into those blood vessels, and then that oxygenated blood is brought back to the heart. So this just sort of summarizes what I was saying on the previous slide. Is that oxygen in high concentration moves across the membrane into the capillary. Carbon dioxide, which is concentrated in the blood, moves into the alveoli, that should say to be exhaled. So what I'd like you to do now is this. So I'm going to leave you in a minute, but before we do, I'm going to get you to create an answer for number 2.3. So what I'd like you to do is complete an explanation of the structure of the lungs. Once you've done that, I want you to go back to number 2.2 and explain the function of the lungs. So the function of the lungs, you should be able to get fairly easily, is to draw oxygen into the, to draw air into the body, to transfer oxygen into the blood, and then exhale carbon dioxide. So I'm going to get you to do the structure first, and then I want you to nip back and do number 2.2. So what I'd like you to do then, I'm going to leave this up for 5 minutes. I'm going to let you fill this out, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to stay online with those people who are new today. So I'm going to just leave this up for 5 minutes. I want you to all begin completing 2.3, and then I'm going to stay online for the people who were brand new today, and then we can work through a couple of other bits. Okay, so I'll stay on the chat box for the minute. I want everyone to just complete 2.3, their explanation of the structure of the lung. That's page 9 of your workbook. So crack on with that. If you don't get it finished, I've sent you this presentation, so you can get on it once I start working with the others. Okay, so I'll give 5 minutes now to just get that, and then we'll shut down.